So we're told that an artist makes a profit of this mathematical description of the profit based on number of paintings. So P equals number of paintings, and when you calculate through this term, you'll end up with what are the profits. And so they're asking you a question. They worded this very carefully because there's going to be two answers. What is the fewest? So what is the smallest number of paintings this artist can sell in order to give $60,000 of profit? Remember, because this has this p squared, it will end up being some type of a parabola. And the $60,000 mark will have, this is 60,000 on the y, and this is the x, is going to have two answers. So there's an x there and an x there. Well, this x is smaller than this x, and so this will be the correct answer for x. This one will also work, but because they're asking for the fewest number of paintings, it doesn't respond to the question, although it fits into the quadratic that they gave us. So there's multiple ways of doing this. I'm going to show you a fast way and then even a faster way with this. The first thing you would need to do is decide where to start. Do we start here at 600? Do we start at 100 paintings, or do we start in the middle? I think a decent way to do it is to start in the middle, and then depending on if your answer is too big or too small, then you know which way to go. But that is part of the logic behind how you answer this quickly using plugin. I just want to show you the problem that is going to result, but remember that you would have to do some kind of logical decision about where to start, either 100, 150, 200. I think I would probably start in the middle if I were doing this for real. But let's start at the bottom with 600 first and see where that goes. So answer choice K is 600. So we plug 600 into our 500 p minus p squared, and that becomes 500 times 600 minus 600 squared. What does that equal? Well, 500 times 600 ends up being 300,000. 6 times 5 is 30, and then you add the 4 zeros, minus 600 squared, 360,000. So now you end up with, this is larger than this, we end up with a negative 60, which is negative $60,000. So obviously that doesn't work. And I think what they put that in there for is if you didn't keep the negative sign through, that maybe you would think that this is the right answer because it did come up with 60,000. But it's not right because it's negative 60,000. We're at 600. Let's go to J, which is 300. So we're going to plug that into our formula. We'd end up with 500 times 300 minus 300 squared. And that will give us 150,000. That's that. Minus 90,000. That's the 300 squared. And that turns out to be $60,000. So if we were going up the ladder like this and we got to J, we would say that gives us the $60,000 we're looking for, we're done. And unfortunately that would be a mistake because of this problem that I pointed out here with a parabola and a quadratic. There's two answers. So let's go to H, and that is 200, 500 times 200 minus 200 squared, which equals 100,000 minus 40,000. And that also equals 60,000. So now we have two answers. Now let's go ahead and do the rest. 150 is the next one. So 150, 500 times 150 minus 150 squared equals, this would be 75,000 minus 2250, 22,500, and that equals 52,500. And now we're on the downside. We're starting to make less and less money now, and so we know that that can't work, but just to show you, so we're complete, it would be 500 times 100 minus 100 squared. This would equal 50,000 minus 10,000 equals 40,000. So we're obviously continuing to go down and down. Okay, now I'm going to show you even a faster way. It's still plug in. This was our given right here, 500 p minus 2 minus p squared. If you had factored out a p right here, you would end up with p times the quantity 500 minus p. Now, what this will do is it puts it in a little bit simpler format, and you'll deal with smaller numbers, and it would have made it even faster to go through and do the math. So if we plug in 100, it would be 100 times 500 minus 100. So this equals 400, and we're multiplying it times 100. So now we end up with 100 times 400, which is 40,000. See how much easier that was? 150 times the quantity 500 minus 150, and that will be 150 times 350. Again, much smaller numbers. That is, probably couldn't do this one in your head, but at least it's very quick on the calculator. 200 times 500 minus 200 will end up being 200 times 300. This actually will illustrate the problem even a little bit better, which is 60,000. And then 300, you're going to see very clearly why this happens. Now, all you're doing is flipping these two. You end up with 300 times 200, which also equals 60,000. But remember, the 200 is the fewest number of paintings. It'd be 600, so that would be 600 times negative 100, or negative 60,000. See how much faster that would be? You could have answered this question really in 30 seconds. And we haven't even gotten to the explanation about how to do it as a quadratic. This can be an extremely involved question or a pretty easy one. Okay, another way to go about this is to put the given information, the 500p minus p squared equals 60,000, into a quadratic equation. If you saw it this way, you can answer it this way. So to put this information into this format would be 500p minus p squared, and then you take the 60,000 and move it so it equals 0. And then you have to simplify or just move this around. This is just 500p minus p squared. So you put the negative p squared term first, plus 500p minus 60 equals 0. And then the final step is to get rid of this negative p coefficient. It's just easier. It doesn't change things. P squared minus 500p plus 60,000, and then a negative 1 times 0 is still 0 over here. So this would be the format into quadratic equation. Okay, now that it's in a quadratic equation, you can do two things. If it's a perfect square and it works out, then you can solve that way. It would be what two numbers times each other will come to 60,000 and add up to negative 500. And this is the format. Remember, you would put it into, you know you're going to have a p by FOIL. That would be p squared. And so what are the two numbers? Well, it's going to turn out to be negative 300 and negative 200 equals 0. That term, p squared, the first term, and then p times the second term would be negative 200p. This term times the first term there is going to be negative 300p, and the last terms times each other would give us positive 60,000. Add these two terms together, we end up with p squared minus 500p plus 60,000, which is the same as that right there. So we know we factored it right to here. So what does that tell us? This tells us that you set each one of them p minus 300 equal 0. So p equal 300. And then you set the second one p minus 200 equals 0. So P equal 200. Those are the two ways of solving this when you put it into a quadratic. And we've already shown the two answers, 200 and 300 paintings, and 200 is less than 300, so that's your answer. If you didn't realize that you could do this squaring formula, you could have put it into a quadratic formula and solve it, which is even harder. Okay, so you have to know the quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, and you have to know the quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and you had to have been able to convert our given information, which was the 500 minus, no, it's 500p minus p squared equals 60,000, and you had to go through that process of converting that into that format right there. And then you needed to remember that the A, B, and C are what we'll plug in over here in this formula. So that tells us that the A is the coefficient on the P squared. So A equals 1. B is the coefficient on the second term, which is negative 500. And C is just the number, 60,000. So now you have to plug that in. Okay, and you have to be careful here because there are so many places to make mistakes along the way. So first of all, you start with plugging in for B. Well, B is negative 500, and it's negative B, which is negative 500. So right off the bat, you have this negative B, and B is negative 500. So you have to cancel out one of the negatives, which then makes it a positive 500. Plus or minus, and that's going to give us the two answer choices, or the two answers. 500 squared minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 60,000, all over 2A, which is 1. Now you have to simplify that even further, and that becomes 500 plus minus square root. 500 squared is 250,000. Minus 4 times 1 is negative 4 times 60,000 becomes negative 4 times 60,000, which is negative 240,000, all over 2. 250,000 minus 240,000 is 10,000. So now we're at 500 plus minus square root of 10,000 all over 2. And that square root of 10,000 is 100. 100 times 100. You take the first 100, you add the two zeros. 1, 2, 3. That's 10,000. So square root of 10,000 is 100. So now, getting closer, 500 plus minus 100 all over 2. And now we're finally able to do the 2. So it's 500 plus 100 over 2. And it's 500 minus 100 over 2. 500 plus 100 is 600. 600 over 2 equals 300. Ta-da, one of our answers. And 500 minus 100, this one, ends up being 400 over 2, which is 200. So there's our two answers, 300 and 200, just like every other way of solving this, only this is gargantuanly harder than any other way, but it shows that math can be done in multiple ways, and some are faster than others, and really shows you how plugging in can be such a time saver, but you have to watch out for the fact that they will set traps for you. All right, good luck.